Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. You can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 165 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on why dyslexia is unique cognitive strength and not a disorder. And it is Friday, the 12th of August 2022 as I record this. So the reason why I actually wanted to do today's episode not only because it's an absolutely brilliant topic that I've actually been talking about and that I've actually been hinting about for quite a while, but it's also because this is the sort of direction where clinical psychology needs to go. Because instead of looking at mental health conditions as like disorders where we sort of treat people as like they're like messed up, deranged, and etc., and all of that has been inherited from the biomedical model and psychology's rather sketchy past when it comes to treating people. But now we know in like modern clinical psychology to focus on the positive terms of like stuff that was like instead of seeing like dyslexia as a mental disorder, that we actually need to see it as a cognitive strength, because that is what it is, with its own unique challenges and disadvantages. But more on that in the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the psychology news section. We're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And just as a little interjection here, it's really hot in the UK here today. The first one is, go ahead and contact that old friend. They'll probably appreciate it more than you think. Amidst our busy lives, it's not always easy to stay in touch with friends. During the pandemic in particular, many people found their social circle shrinking, and even though friendship has clear benefits for well-being, mental health, and personal growth, getting in touch with friends sometimes falls down our list of priorities. A new study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology suggests that we should probably be making more of an effort to keep in touch. It finds that reaching out can have a surprisingly big impact, with people appreciating it far more than we expect. So there's not a great amount that I can actually say about this one, but personally, yeah, there are definitely some old friends that I probably should actually contact and that I should try to reach out to. But am I going to do it? I know I should. This might inspire me, but I sort of doubt it, sadly, though. But in case that you have any older friends, then definitely do it, because of course there are benefits that not only improve your mental health, but it can help you for the long term. So definitely try it and do it. And if it works out, let me know, because that might give me the extra push for that. I might be able to do it. So the second one is, telling a partner about your bad days, can that bring you closer? When something bad happens to you in your everyday life, you get a parking ticket, say, or have a disappointment, or have a disagreement with a co-worker, your first instinct may be to tell your loved one about it. But what purpose does this serve? Although we often believe that venting to a partner will actually make us feel better, past research suggests that it can actually prolong negative emotions, or that they can even have a spillover effect, leaving the listener feeling worse too. But a new paper in social psychological and personality science has found another explanation for why we tell loved ones about these everyday hassles. It brings couples closer together. And this is another critical one to actually focus on, because of course in a relationship, well, they're not so much work, but you always do need to put the effort in there, which is why these sort of easy wins are actually quite brilliant. Okay, now why? Because they're really easy for you to do, and it can actually have relationship benefits. So we'd definitely take a note of that one, perhaps. And the last one is, study casts doubt on the idea that murderers are particularly psychopathic. What do you think characterizes the personality of a murderer? Going by countless TV shows, podcasts, and books, not to mention studies linking certain personality traits to callous, violent acts, you'll probably think psychopathy. However, actual scientific research in to this has been astonishingly slim on the ground, and now a study of prisoners in Serbia report that in fact murderers have less in the way of a psychopathic and also sadistic traits than other kinds of criminals. So because that was actually quite a short one, there's not a great amount of that I can say. But what I will say is that I tend to read a piece a lot, and then there's another one. Well, the first one is, if we think that we know something, is always a good to try and find a researcher, but a researcher to actually try and back it up. And if there's not a lot of actual research, then we do need to expand the area. Because as we know that in psychology, which is a science, we always need to be pushing the boundaries and actually making sure that the stuff that we assume is actually research supported and not just made up, like the psychopathy and murderers is. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So, but this week has definitely been one of the more varied weeks because I've been doing lots of different things. For example, with psychology based stuff, I've been working on different psychology books. I've actually not done any research this week because because as most of the listeners are university psychology students here, but or they have been in the past, then we all know when we think that we've been really clever and we decide to knock out tons of different research and tons of different bits of reading for psychology coursework, psychology books in my case. So last week I sort of got research overloaded. So no, I was not doing any research this week. I might do some tonight, but no, I just cannot bring myself to do any psychology research. And then the only other bit of interesting news that I have for all of you, but is that this week I've actually been completely updating my own direct storefront on payhip.com/Connor Whiteley. So what this is that if you go to the website, then you can actually go and buy all of my books there instead of money lining the pockets of the big companies like a certain Zon company and so many other great companies that I absolutely love and as a reader I absolutely love a Kobo. But if you wanted to support authors more directly and making sure that as much as your money is possible, it's supporting authors, then you can actually buy from them directly. And you can now buy all of my fiction and non-fiction books from there, including all of the ones that have been released this year. So that's payhip.com/Connor Whiteley. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi Whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Biological Psychology. And originally, this actually wasn't going to be the sponsored product for today's episode. But because this podcast episode actually has such a bigger basis in evolutionary psychology, then this great, really easy to understand book is actually a brilliant resource to help you understand what is biological psychology, how does evolutionary psychology work, and so many other great topics. So topic to do with how our biology impacts our behavior though. But to be honest, it might not be one of the most regular ones, but it is a really interesting topic that I absolutely love to research. So that is Biological Psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can buy the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. So that's enough of the personal update, so let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be looking at why is dyslexia a unique cognitive strength, and this is just a brilliant podcast episode that I really do just want to dive straight into it because it's so good. Why dyslexia is a cognitive strength. Dyslexia was the first discovered in the 1890s by Rudolf Berlin, and it has always been called a disorder of writing and reading. Like with other conditions, it is this negative label that is preventing us from seeing that dyslexia is instead a unique cognitive style and not a disorder, especially if it did because of it being helpful to earlier humans. The research for questioning the disease model of dyslexia. A new paper in Frontiers by Taylor and Vestergaard from June 2022 has argued that dyslexia is an evolved cognitive specialization with its own advantages and disadvantages, with Taylor promoting this viewpoint in different places for a number of years. As a result, the two researchers pointed to very interesting facts about dyslexia that help us to leave the disease model behind. Firstly, dyslexia is a universal in humans, as well as it seems dyslexia has a strong genetic component. This means that the genes underlying dyslexia are probably pretty ancient. Secondly, dyslexia is widespread amongst the human population, with the low estimates proposing that 5% of the human species has dyslexia around the world, and the high estimates propose 20% of the species has the condition. And to support this point even more, serious diseases of the childhood tend to have a far lower prevalence rate. This is because natural selection tends to remove the diseases from the population. So why didn't natural selection get rid of dyslexia? This question has been partially answered by the researchers Frog and Fertit L in their book The Dyslexic Advantage, because they highlight that a worldwide disorder in childhood that occurs at such a high rate could only be there possibly if it helps us to survive. What are the benefits and the cognitive strengths of the dyslexia? There are a lot of cognitive strengths within people with dyslexia. For example, dyslexic people add divergent thinking, meaning that they have the ability to come up with multiple solutions to any given problem, and this could help us to explain why about 1/3 of American entrepreneurs have dyslexia. In addition, people with dyslexia tend to see the bigger picture rather than getting lost in all of the details, such as dyslexic individuals are quicker to notice when a work of art shows an impossible figure, like in M.C. Schizer's Waterfall. Also, it is very important to note that people with dyslexia have an aptitude for engineering, art, and architecture. And then the reason why that's important is because in these sectors, they tend to be overrepresented. As a result, this does point us in a way to a massive problem within the Western education system that prizes writing and reading so highly and attempts to instill it at a very early age. However, perhaps one of the most disturbing features of our education system is the way that it is set up to shatter the confidence of the dyslexic children, due to they are constantly told that unless they can write and read perfectly, then they have no good future. And this is before we acknowledge that for ages, researchers have known that a person's lower confidence is associated with relationship troubles, substance abuse, and negative moods. That's why it is possibly vital that we seek a different approach. The evolutionary heritage of the dyslexia. Something else that Taylor proposes in human evolution is what she calls complementary cognition. The core idea of this type of cognition is that as humans, we were designed to evolve to have different cognitive skills, and these skills are complemented one another to enhance the overall group's survival chance. This is actually really interesting to think about, because if we look at other species, they have similar characteristics. For example, in termite colonies, of all things, you have different termites that behave very differently, like the workers, the breeders, and the fighters. But it is their differences that allow them to thrive. Therefore, Taylor believes that human minds work in a similar way, because with human societies facing all the same challenges, which is to acquire the information and the resources that they need to survive and thrive, it is very important that different people use different cognitive strategies to help us achieve these aims. Putting this into practice, at the most basic level of this theory, there are two fundamental specializations, which are exploration and exploitation, since humans need to be able to explore new environments freely, so we can get the resources like food and water. But the problem is that once these are found, we need to develop ways to use and exploit these resources effectively. Or putting this into a more abstract example, when we seek out new ideas that help us solve problems, this is an this is an example of exploration. Then exploitation is where you develop in depth ideas that are already in existence, as well as it is probably more accurate to see a exploration and exploitation as a spectrum and not either or situation. As a result, Taylor believes dyslexia, as well as ADHD, are expressions of the exploratory cognitive specialization, with the problem being Western education that focuses too much on the exploitative cognitive style, but whilst stifling the exploratory kind. And personally, this sort of argument can be seen in the literature of different fields, because to grossly oversimplify this, there is concern about the amount of spoon feeding information we are giving to our children, and then just getting them to repeat the information in exams without getting them to creatively use or apply the information beyond what they need to repeat in their exams. Conclusion and implications. Personally, I think this is a very interesting idea, and even though this is only done by one researcher and their research, I think it is worthy of a more research attention, because this is the sort of research we need in clinical psychology to truly understand mental health conditions in more depth, and more importantly, to help support us moving away from the damaging labels and towards a place or point more accepting of these so-called disorders. Due to, if Taylor is correct, this means continuing to use dyslexia as a disorder. It is not only a problem for those that are with dyslexia anymore, it is a massive problem for society as a whole, because we are disingenuine a cognitive style that has been a key to our species' survival for the long term. However, as I've said before, we need a lot more research into this before we can draw any firm conclusions. But the point of this podcast episode is about the importance of moving away from damaging labels and disorders that only make the suffering and the psychological distress for our clients worse, and towards something more positive. And that something is more positive for everyone. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope that you got something out of it. I know that I did, and these sort of really positive podcast episodes, I really do enjoy, and I really hope to do them more in the future. If you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, then definitely check out Biological Psychology, available in all the usual places. But if you didn't want to buy a book, but you still wanted to give the podcast a bit of one-time support, then you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. And remember, you can now buy the book directly from me at payhip.com/Connor Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.